Good morning everybody and welcome to this meeting of Mid-Suffolk District Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor Susie Morley, Leader of Mid-Suffolk District Council, and I'm chairing this meeting today. May I remind you of some domestic arrangements? Please ensure that you maintain social distancing from all other persons whilst in the chamber and in the communal areas. Please ensure that you wear a face covering at all times unless you are sitting down or if you are exempt from doing so, and that you use the hand sanitizer and wipes provided. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers or hold separate conversations whilst others are speaking. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. And finally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app, so please could all members make sure they are logged in and ready to use the app. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. I'm now going to move to the agenda, please. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Gould.
Thank you very much. Item 2, to receive declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest by members. Are there any to declare? No? Thank you. Item 3 is MCA/21/33, and this is to confirm the minutes of the Cabinet meeting held on the 6th of December 2022. Are there any points of accuracy of the minutes? Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Haddingham, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Flatman, thank you. The Governance Officer will now conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress in your app. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 8 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Item 4, to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received.
None. Item 5, questions by councillors.
None received.
Thank you. Item 6 is matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or Joint Audit and Standards Committee. And I now invite the Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Wellham, to present the recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Councillor
Thank you, Chair. Mid-Suffolk Overview and Scrutiny considered the draft General Fund budget and the 4-year outlook. And they've asked that the Cabinet Member for Finance have regard to the detailed comments that are set out in the appendix before finalising his budget and presenting it to Council. Those comments are set out on pages 13 and 14, and I'm assuming that I don't need to refer to them anymore because the Cabinet will have read them. Detailed comments were made in respect of a couple of things. One was concern over staffing and vacancies, and the other was over the very high level of reserves, especially the plan to put another £3.35 million into reserves when members of the committee felt that this ought to be spent on services for our communities. A more general concern is around the timing of the scrutiny of budgets. members consider that there is greater value in reviewing the budget process and the assumptions made in developing a detailed budget. This would allow a more strategic approach to scrutinising the budget. A further concern expressed by committee was the need to ensure financial scrutiny of all aspects of the Council's work, and also there is currently a lack of clarity around the terms of reference of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the Audit and Standards Committee and the Monitoring Officer and the Constitution Working Group have been asked to look into this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wellham.
Do you want me to go straight on to the...
no, I'll take questions on this one first. Anybody have any questions? No? Okay, thank you, Councillor Wellham. Continue. Oh, sorry, Councillor Reaper.
Thank you, Chair. If I may ask a question, I just wondered if the, and it's probably for yourself, Chair, as leader, rather than the Overview and Scrutiny Chair, with regards to the...
questions need to be addressed to Councillor Wellham.
Okay, I'll address them. In terms of the budget, the future involvement, earlier involvement with the budget, would this be able to consider the involvement of the community in setting the budget, especially on the choices available for that community, and get them more involved in the budget setting process, please? And secondly, it's noted that Councillor Whitehead had said that the use of the £3.5 million would be considered by Cabinet for use in the community, and I just wondered when that was going to be considered. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for the question. Yes, what the Overview and Scrutiny Committee would like to do would be to have a really thorough look at the budget process, and obviously we haven't looked into how we would do that, but certainly one of the aspects would be to consider how there could be some community involvement in drawing up the budget for the next year. Thank you.
Thank you. We are intending consulting on more widely on the budget next year with our residents. Thank you for that, Councillor Wellham. Your comments are noted.
Sorry, Chair, I didn't hear a word that you said then.
Sorry. I said that we are intending consulting more widely next year, and that will start to take place next week. And your recommendations are noted. Thank you.
Thank you. That's good to hear, because that's something that the Overview and Scrutiny can work with finance people to consider how that can best be done. Thank you.
Thank you. If you can move on to the HRA now.
Certainly, yeah. A number of detailed questions were asked, and members made a number of comments on the budget and the 4-year outlook. And these are contained in an appendix, so I'm assuming that they have all been read. There are a couple of concerns. One was the volume of planned maintenance work, which will not be completed by the end of the current municipal year, resulting in a large carryover, adding to the volume of work planned for next financial year. Concern was also expressed around the large increase in housing rents at a time of high increases in the cost of energy and so on. Committee asked that information be provided to the council meeting later this month, comparing the level of rent proposed with levels of council house rents which are levied by other authorities. Again, happy to answer any questions.
Cabinet members have any questions for Councillor Wellham? No. Thank you, Councillor Wellham. Your recommendations are noted. Item 7 is the forthcoming decisions list. Does anybody have any comments on that? No. Item 8, MCA/21/34, is the General Fund budget for 2022 to 23 and the 4-year outlook. I'll now invite the Cabinet Member for Finance to introduce his report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For my first report today, I'd like to introduce the General Fund Budget 22-23 and 4-year Outlook Report, MCA 2134, which starts on page 21 of our pack. Over the past few years, we've delivered outturns significantly ahead of budget. And whilst one driver of that has been additional income, we've also acknowledged that in building up the budget, department by department, we've perhaps layered caution onto caution. So for this new budget 22-23, managers have been pushed to use stretching but realistic assumptions across both income and expenditure. We anticipate an outturn position, therefore being closer to budget going forward, and acknowledge there is an element of risk to this approach. We will, of course, continue to monitor the position with our regular quarterly reporting to Cabinet. This budget has already been to all member briefings, group briefings and to overview and scrutiny, and we welcome the observations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which are duly noted. As well as setting the annual budget, we do our best to forecast a 4-year outlook so we can bring a longer-term approach to align our financial strategy to our medium-term 6 corporate strategic priorities. Now, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, we are not helped in this approach by central government, who for the 3rd year have provided only 1 year of certainty in their local government settlement. And furthermore, with the settlement only just being announced prior to Christmas, when so much of the hard graft behind our budget work is nearing completion, then surprise announcements like an additional 971,000 of income compared to what we were assuming almost invariably needs first to be put into reserves before any detailed new spending plans for them can be established. Still, it would be churlish not to welcome this additional money. Chart 4 at paragraph 4.27 in the report shows that the government grant allocation is £749,000 higher in 22-23 compared to 21-22, including a very generous new homes bonus settlement. Now, every year, I believe, bar none, we've closed off our accounts without ever needing to use new homes bonus to fund our base services. Now, having looked back at budgets from several years ago whilst writing this introductory speech, I'm struck by our increasing use of graphics in these reports, and I hope particularly that members this year will find the many colourful pie charts of income, expenditure and reserves useful in putting the numerical information into a more easy to understand visual format. I'm struck particularly by the total income chart 7 on page 40, where we see the council tax segment of 6.96 million and the investment income of 4.631 million. This investment from the likes of Suffolk is the equivalent of about £114 per bandy property. A lot of hard work over the years has gone into developing these income streams, and it is one of the key drivers behind our decision to freeze council tax for the coming year. The tax base itself has also grown by 4.47% year on year, which also assists a great deal. Now, as a local authority, we can't claim to be unique, but there's no doubt in my mind that we are a very favourable outlier in the LA universe when it comes to our financial position. Although we only set council tax for 1 year at a time, our 4-year outlook is based on there being no increase in council tax precept per dwelling over that entire period. But I must stress, beyond March 23, that's just a forecast, not a promise. As I said earlier, it's so difficult to plan beyond a year when we have just a 1-year settlement from the central government. Our 4-year forecast shows each year to be in surplus, and our schedule of reserves shows the real potential to grow our ambitions beyond those first 4 £1 million pots of money that we've put aside in this current financial year to be spent over the coming months for the benefit of our residents in Mid-Suffolk. Now, there's a lot of detail in this budget report, including several pages of budget assumptions and risks. I won't go through those here, but they should be read to get a fuller understanding of our revenue and expenditure budget. There is another important budget element within this report, and I refer, of course, to capital. The details of that are tabulated in Appendix A on page 48. We have a large carry forward, which is primarily our very exciting Gateway 14 project. And having got the hybrid planning permission approval in 2021, it will now be full steam ahead on that project. The other large capital projects relate to Mid-Suffolk growth housing and the replacement of our refuse freighters. Total capital spend for 22-23 is budgeted at 29 million, and this includes the new allocation of 9.6 million that councillors will be asked to approve at full council. The recommendations in the report today is that these general fund budget proposals for 22-23 and the 4-year outlook be endorsed by Cabinet to take to full council on the 24th of February. These proposals include a freeze on Mid-Suffolk elemental council tax, where the bandy precept remains at £171.59, which works out at only 47 pence per day for all the many valuable services we provide. I'm pleased to move these recommendations and would ask for a seconder. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Do we have a seconder?
I'm happy to second the report, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flatman. Do we have any questions from Cabinet members? Questions from anybody else? Councillor Eburn?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Whitehead, for this, and thank you for everybody for working on it. I've got a few questions just with regards to the process, and then one very specific one, if I may. In setting this up, you talk about self-financing and not being reliant on government funding, although I think it's about 17% of our funding comes from government. So is there a figure that you'd want to, get down to, as it were, not accept government funding? Noting as well that, you say we never used New Homes Bonus. Secondly, on the evaluation of, how we're putting a budget together, you talk about that being based on increased social value, but I understand, I'm not sure what we measure and how we measure increased social value, so I'll be interested in that. And thirdly, at 4.13, you talk about driving out inefficiencies, and I just wondered if you could give an example of an inefficiency and how much you would expect to save on that. And I've got one very specific question, if I may, Chair, that on the business rates. I understand that last year we had somewhat of a bonus from the Bramford substation in the millions figure. And I just wondered, is that included in this business rates, and is that an ongoing amount? And I appreciate that might be quite specific to answer at this point in time, but I would be interested to know if that's ongoing or it was a one-off. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Well, in terms of government funding, we certainly welcome that. I mean, it's money that we don't have to find elsewhere. But in terms of the other streams, we do get an awful lot of money in from our fees and charges, planning income, building control, and many other areas, such as garden waste, for example, as well as the business rates we collect and the council tax. So I think we've got to look at it in the whole overall scheme, which I think is why it's useful sometimes to see these things in coloured pie charts. But I can't give you a definitive answer in terms of sort of what percentage are we aiming for. I think we're just basically trying to reduce our reliance and become more self-sufficient with no sort of real target in mind, but just basically a direction of travel. I think you mentioned that we don't use New Homes Bonus. I think the reality is we don't use New Homes Bonus for our base services, just because although it's been going on 15 years, we always sort of felt that it's government's gift to give or government's gift to take away. So we've tried our best not to rely on that. A couple of years I think we've used some money to produce a balanced budget, but then the outturns have always been of such an extent that we never actually did use New Homes Bonus at all. In terms, again, of our base budget. But so much of that has gone in over the years into first the Transformation Fund and then the Growth and Efficiency Fund, which has been used for one-off projects to benefit our communities. So that's my sort of thoughts on New Homes Bonus. In terms of how we measure social value, I mean, it's something that, as an accountant, it's always puzzled me a bit, where we talk about for every pound spent, we get £12 back of social value. And I'm probably a bit of a cynic, and I probably shouldn't be, but I don't know if anyone or any officers would perhaps come to my rescue in terms of what their thoughts are in terms of social value and measuring it.
I can try and, pardon me, I can try and assist. Only from the perspective of we are developing a social values framework so that we can be very clear and try and measure exactly as you describe the impact that we're having. That is harder by its very nature to measure because it's qualitative, not quantitative. I always have to think before I get those the wrong way around. But there is also conversations been happening both through the Suffolk Health and Wellbeing Board and also with Suffolk partners more widely, because as you can imagine, what's good social value impact for Mid-Suffolk isn't unique to Mid-Suffolk, it's also true of the wider public sector. So rather than doing these things in isolation, we're looking at how we can do it together so that we can have a single mechanism, particularly for the measuring aspect, which I think would help Councillor Whitehead to some degree possibly with that cynicism, but also help with all of us to be able to be clear how much we can stretch every pound that we invest in our districts.
Councillor Rubin also asked a question about an example of inefficiencies. I think over the years we have become more efficient, and perhaps it becomes more difficult to sort of grasp sort of up to the minute ideas on that. I mean, the one thing that just comes to mind is in the old days when I used to turn up at Needham Market to see an officer and then find they were in Hadley, and many officers spent their time moving back and forward between Hadley and Needham Market. That was a big inefficiency that was that we got rid of by moving into Endeavour House, as well as the sort of the climate inefficiencies of that building with its single glazing and ridiculously bad EPC. So that's my comment there. In terms of business rates and the Bradford substation, my understanding is once something gets on the valuation list, it's there with a rateable value. It's a figure is applied to that rateable value each year. So it's the sort of gift that keeps on giving. But just in case I'm not wrong there, I'll just ask Catherine just to clarify that what I've said is correct. I think, I see my nodding head is the fact that, yes, the Bradford substation was a bonus, if you like, the first year, and it's there for good now. Well, I think that basically answers the questions.
So yes, I was sort of nodding my head that what Councillor Whitehead was saying was correct in terms of the business rates. Just to say, I think there is mention in the report that we have to do a return as at the end of January to the government around business rates, which is called our NNDR1 return, and we're just analysing that to see if there's any other impact from that in terms of the business rates figures.
Councillor Rubin?
May I just come back? Thank you ever so much for that, Councillor Whitehead, and thank you, Catherine. If it'd be useful, I was wondering if we can ask whether members can see the analysis of business rates, just so we know, get an idea of that. And secondly, if social value is being developed, and obviously it wasn't used for this budget, although it mentions it in the report, and whether we could be kept, we could be told when that's happening and let us know about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have a question for Councillor Whitehead on reserves. From what I can see, we've got a 3.35 million going into the Growth and Efficiency Fund, which will end up with a surplus of roughly 3.5 million at the end of the financial year. And obviously a total reserves figure of 19 million there. A couple of places in the report, section 43 of the Local Government Act 1992 is quoted, where it says the council must have regard to the level of reserves. So I want to ask if this act places any restrictions on the level of reserves that the council carries, and also just further, what is the intention for the Growth and Efficiency Fund? What are we going to spend that 3.5 million on? Thank you.
Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. I'm not aware of any legislation that limits level of reserves. I was looking at one district council a few days ago, which appeared to have a £70 million reserve. I'm not quite sure how they managed to achieve that. It certainly puts ours into perspective at 18 million. I think there's about 18 or 19 categories there in that table 5 of reserves. So, you know, it is spread out for a number of reasons. The Growth and Efficiency Fund, by its very nature, I mean, it's supposed to be there any day. Any councillor can suggest a project for its use. Any member of staff from top to bottom can sort of come forward with ideas for its use. And we've changed it from transformation to growth and efficiency because basically so much of it's come from growth or efficiencies, and its purpose is not only to bring money from that, but then to use it for future growth and efficiency. So I always hope that it will become a sort of virtuous circle, that money would come in from growth and efficiencies and then be used to create further growth and efficiencies. But, you know, I want to be totally clear that that money is not there to be determined at budget time. It's there for any kind of project, any time of year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Did you have a question for a question, or are you wanting to start the debate?
I had a question.
Okay,
Chair.
go ahead.
John, actually my question is triggered by the question asked by Councillor Eburn concerning the Bramford station. We have a nationally significant infrastructure project just starting up near Progress Power, along with another quite a large substation. We also have a number of solar farms growing up in the district. How do we benefit financially from these? Do they pay business rates? You know, what is the public benefit?
Councillor Whitehead.
I'll start my answer, but I shall probably look to Catherine for a bit of guidance as well, because I don't claim to be a business rates expert. My understanding is that things like the Progress Power station, things like solar farms, and the likes of potentially Valley Ridge and our own Gateway 14 development, all of these will bring in business rates because they'll all be valued for business rating purposes, and then the multiplier will be applied to that, and it'll be shared between ourselves, the county and central government. But I'd ask Catherine just to put perhaps a bit more meat on those bones, if I may.
We'll invite Catherine to come in on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. In terms of something like the substation, that obviously is a significant development. What happens is we report all of those new developments through to the valuation office, and then the valuation office determines whether it might stay on what's called the local list, where we would gain some benefit from it, or if it is actually on the central list. If it's on the central list, then the government keeps all of the business rates associated with it. So we're not clear at the moment with something like the substation as to which list that one is going to fall on. In terms of things like the solar farms, they are classed as sort of green initiatives, and we do get to keep more of the business rates locally, where we have things like that, and wind turbines as well are a couple of examples. So those ones we do get to keep more of the income locally than would normally go past 50% across to the government.
Thank you. May I have just a follow-up? Yes, I mean, something like the power plant, which will, as opposed to the substation, that's quite a large item. So I hope we're doing our best to be able to gain as much financial benefit from it as possible. And it may be I'm not sure. At the moment, is it the only large energy project in the district, NSIP in the district? I think it may be. But anyway, if you could assure us that we're doing our best to benefit from such a large development. Thank you.
So now going to move on to debate. Does anybody wish to debate? Councillor Richardson?
Thank you very much, Chair. A few points I'd like to make with regards to this paper. I think first, as ever, has to be a thanks to our Section 151 officer and the finance team for putting together this document in such a timely manner as per usual. I think a few sort of general reflections, having listened to what Councillor Whitehead has said and having read the report, I think it's absolutely fundamental that we note the lack of clarity that we have in terms of our longer term financial position because of the national government's grant allocation. But notwithstanding that, I think Councillor Whitehead is absolutely right in my view that we need to put our relative financial position in the context of our medium term outlook. And I think given the fact that we've got an increasing council tax base, given the fact that we've got increased revenue coming from our investments, I think we have, what that gives us is a much greater degree of flexibility when it comes to investing in our communities, both in terms of revenue, but both in terms of capital as well. And Councillor Whitehead gave Gateway 14 as a very, very obvious and very welcome example. But not only does it give it that flexibility, I do think, notwithstanding the context of that lack of clarity, it does give us, I think, as a cabinet, a degree of assurance about our medium-term financial security, which I think is something that's very important because although, and I completely understand Councillor Whitehead's sort of note of caution, but I think within the context of what we're looking at and what we're discussing now, we should put it into the context of we are in a relatively fortuitous position relative to some of our peers. So I think that's absolutely right that we're prudent and we're sensible, but we shouldn't underestimate the opportunities that we have as a result of our financial position. And finally, actually, there was a point that Councillor Eburn raised about social value, which I think is a very important one. And I just wanted to reiterate what the Chief Executive had said, particularly around working with partners across the system. I think people or our residents will not make the distinction between district and borough or county when it is coming to the delivering of value for money and investing in social value as a concept. So just to, again, build on what the Chief Executive said, we had a meeting of the Health and Wellbeing Board on the 20th of January where we considered social value as a not just a principle, but actually something we want to deliver in practice. And so that will cover the periods, I was just having a look at the papers now, it covers the period from 2022 to 2026. So sort of now is absolutely the right time for us to be looking at that. And what that does, just by way of context, is not just about looking at social value in the services that we deliver ourselves. It's also about using our purchasing power as a relatively large spender locally to actually encourage our contractors and our suppliers to adopt the social value principles as well. And that's for things like hiring local people or sourcing local products, because I think that's a really important way of delivering a whole spectrum of different social value. So Suffolk County Council's Health and Wellbeing, the paper that went to it, broke it down into different social, economic and environmental benefits. And I think there's a huge amount that we can embed within all aspects of our corporate plan that follow those principles. So I think that's an absolutely essential area that both county and obviously us as Mid-Suffolk can focus on. But I'm absolutely confident that we can do that going forward. Thank you, Chair. And if I didn't mention it, I'm very happy to support the recommendations in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, the social return on value is something that's becoming increasingly inbuilt into our purchasing cycle. A really good example of this is the Needham Lake Visitor Centre, where some of the determinations were made around what the social return for our residents was, and that was a key factor in the decision making around that. So I'm also very happy with this report. I think Councillor Whitehead and Catherine and our office have done a really good job on this. If there's nobody else wishes... Oh, sorry, Councillor Fleming.
Thank you. I mean, just very briefly, I'd just like to to echo what Councillor Richardson has said and Councillor Eburn about social value. It's something we're much more aware of now. And just looking at the various charts in this paper, the new homes bonus has brought in a lot of money to the district over the years. And even though that may be levelling off into the future, we have a really good pot here. And I feel that the original intent of New Home Bonus is to, in a way, compensate communities for the usually more sort of short to medium term effects of growth and house building. And I think there's an awful lot we can and should be doing with that money to reinvest in our communities, to make sure that the environment is, and that the quality of life is restored to communities. And, I think there's a real agenda ahead to look at things differently and proactively, with the fortunate amount of money we've got here. Thank you.
Anybody else wishes to join the debate? No? In which case I'm now going to ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress in your app. Councillor Fleming, are you able to vote? Would you like me to take your vote verbally?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 8 votes for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So moving on now to item 9. This is the MCA/21/35. Is the Housing Revenue Account 2022 to 23 budget. I'm going to invite Councillor Whitehead to introduce his report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I'd like to now introduce our second budget report, which covers a ring-fenced housing revenue account. It's report MCA 2135 that starts on page 81. These last 2 years during the COVID pandemic, they've negatively impacted our housing revenue account. Our new build programme has been seriously delayed due to lockdown measures and social distancing, and our maintenance and repair programme has likewise been affected. In our forecasted outturn for the present year, which was brought to Cabinet in December, we set out the forecasted £750,000 adverse revenue impact in 21-22, and this learning experience has been built into the budget for the new year 22-23. The 14% uplift on building services expenditure from the current year's budget to next year's budget may on the face of it seem either excessive or over-prudent, but I do not believe this to be the case. I would describe it as preparing the budget on a realistic basis. There are still backlogs to be caught up, and there is without doubt a great deal of inflationary pressure on building materials and supplies. On the income side, the government has for quite a few years now set out guidance and limits for the year-on-year changes to our council house rent levels. We had 5 years up to March 20 when we were obliged to reduce rents in each of those years by 1%. So a rent reduction of marginally over 5% in that period, which has been truly challenging for our housing revenue account. Since 2020, we've been allowed to increase rents by CPI plus 1%, leading to modest year-on-year increases. This year, though, inflation has moved far above the government's own target for CPI, leading to this proposed 4.1% rent increase. All of us must have some concerns regarding such an uplift. Therefore, I feel the need to put this into the context of our housing revenue account. We expect to start the year 22-23 with HRA reserves of just under 3 million. Now that might sound like a decent sized number to most people, But as we have 3,000 houses, it equates to less than £1,000 per house. In addition, even with this 4.1% rent increase, we're only anticipating a marginally above break-even position for the budget this year. So this new year will add very little to reserves. But yet we have great ambitions to improve our council house stock. Along with upgrades and replacements to kitchens and bathrooms when they're needed, we must look to better insulation and other measures that will be needed to bring all our housing stock in due course up to an EPC level of C. And all of this, of course, framed within the context of our carbon zero aspirations. And those certainly won't be achieved with just £1,000 per dwelling. A great deal more detail, putting the meat on these bones, will be coming forward in our next 30-year HR business plan, which is due soon. But it's clear now that for the future benefit of our residents, remembering that this HRA is a ring-fenced account, we do need to make this 4.1% rent increase. We are proposing to keep garage rents and sheltered housing services charges frozen at current levels and are making modest increases to sheltered housing utility charges, which will still include an element of cross-subsidy. We have an ambitious capital programme in this budget. As I said earlier, COVID seriously delayed our new build programme, so have in total an anticipated 21.5 million capital carry forward, along with 17.6 million of new capital funding. Over the next 4 years, we have identified development sites to deliver 341 new homes, a welcome increase in our housing stock for those residents most in need of a new house to call home. There's clearly a lot more detail in the report than I can cover in my introduction, but I'd like to now move the recommendations set out in section 3 of our report. They are itemised in paragraphs 3.1 to 3.7, and I'll ask the Cabinet Member for Housing to second those recommendations. She, along with myself and the Finance team and the AD for Housing, will be happy to answer any questions that members may have on this HRA business report. Budget report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Hadding?
Thank you. Yes, I'm very happy to second this. Thank you.
Do we have any questions from Cabinet members? Any questions from anybody else? Councillor Eburn?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Whitehead, for that. Just with regards to the proposed rent increases of 4.1%, obviously we're all aware of the cost of living increases that most people are suffering from at the moment. Could you just, or could somebody let me know if there's going to be any additional help available to people that may be struggling and that increase might sort of tip them over, as it were? If so, if there's anything additional over and above what we already offer. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Whitehead?
In terms of the sort of process, when our tenants do start to struggle with the rent payments, that, perhaps ask Gavin to sort of detail, the sort of process that we go through and what other help might be available.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Eburn, for the question. I think it's important to note all of the help and assistance that officers within the housing team do provide, not only to housing tenants, but on a tenure neutral basis. So we have a team of tenancy support officers that provide a level of financial inclusion and advice and assistance to those in most need. Part of that is about benefit maximisation, as well as looking at opportunities to attract possibly grants or loans or support into those people homes and their household bills. In addition to that, we have obviously received over recent months additional funding from the government, both in relation to the Household Support Fund, for which Suffolk received 5.1 million and has been allocated to a variety of outcomes, including food and fuel poverty, the local welfare assistance scheme, and to housing as well. And in addition to that, Baber and Mid Suffolk District Councils have received additional homelessness prevention monies towards the latter half of last year that have to be spent by March, and we're fully on track to spend those homelessness prevention monies to support those in greatest need as well. In terms of what may be coming forward, clearly everyone in the room will be aware of some of the announcements last week in terms of around energy and particularly the challenges that individuals will be facing across the country in terms of energy bills, whether that be the additional loan or reduction in council tax rates of, I think, a value of £150 for any home A to D from memory. So there's some examples. But most importantly, we will continue to promote not only our services, but the services of others, including the Citizens Advice Bureau, for whom I met with on Friday to talk about closer joined up working, and know that residents can contact officers, whether they be within the housing service, the communities team, or anyone else when looking for support.
Thank you. I'm now going to open it up for debate. Does anybody wish to add anything? Councillor Haddingham?
Thank you. Yes, I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you and well done to all the members of the Housing and the Finance team for producing this report in what's been a very difficult year with the rising prices of both materials and labour. So thank you and well done, guys.
Thank you. So the recommendations are before you, 3.1 to 3.7. I'm now going to ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress in your app. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 8 votes for.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to item 10, MCA/21/36 is the business rates relief policies. I'm going to invite Councillor Whitehead again to present his report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So for my third report of today, nothing like starting the week with a bang rather than a whimper, I'm pleased to introduce the Business Rates Relief Policies Report MCA/21/36, which starts on page 91. The government's recently announced plans to provide additional business rate support packages, the COVID-19 Additional Relief Fund, or CARF for short, and the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Discount Transitional Relief and Supporting Small Businesses Relief. As with earlier reliefs and discounts, these 4 new schemes are temporary measures, and the government is not enacting primary legislation to bring them into effect. Instead, the government's relying on local authorities to use their discretionary powers granted by the Localism Act to grant these reliefs, discounts and grant payments. In granting these, we as a local authority will be fully reimbursed by the government. So although we have the choice whether to use our discretion, it would seem nonsensical not to do so. Through the 4 schemes, we can reduce the business rates or make grants to local businesses that meet the criteria at no cost to ourselves. National money for local businesses. Our officers within the Shared Revenues Partnership are currently analysing the business rates rating list data to identify eligible cases to model schemes and processes to be followed for the CARF scheme. The government expects local authorities to make payments from the CARF scheme in this financial year and to award the other reliefs and discounts to eligible ratepayers in time for the new 2022-23 bills issued in March. so time is clearly of the essence. Appendixes A, B and C in the report set out the proposed policies covering the 3 reliefs and discounts. I'd like to move the recommendations set out in section 3, paragraphs 3.1 to 3.4. As the CARF's policy is still in development, 3.1 grants our AD for corporate resources in consultation with myself and a cabinet member for economy authority to agree that policy. And with us today is Andrew Wilcock, who is the Revenues Operation Manager in the Shared Revenues Partnership. And he, along with myself and Catherine Steele, are here to answer any questions that members may have on these 4 policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me, sorry. I had great pleasure on behalf of businesses in seconding this report, which will obviously give businesses that are getting crippled alive and keep them running. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brewster. Do we have any questions from Cabinet members? No? Questions from anybody else? No? In which case, I'll open up for debate. Does anybody wish to engage in debate? No? So, the recommendations are 3.1 to 3.4, and I'm going to ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's 8 votes for. It's unanimous.
Thank you very much. So our next item is item 11, MCA/21/37, the Accommodation and Agile Strategy for Endeavour House. Unfortunately, the Cabinet Member for Assets and Investments is unable to be here, so I'm going to introduce the report. I'm pleased to be presenting this report today as part of our journey to deliver truly collaborative, forward-looking workspaces for our staff and councillors that will support them to serve our communities and residents. We have all worked in different ways over the last 2 years and have learnt many things. We have taken this opportunity to consider the best ways of working in the future by engaging with both staff and councillors and listen to what they have learnt through the pandemic. Our staff survey showed that staff believed they could be most effective by working in a hybrid way, with the main reasons for coming into the office to collaborate with colleagues and partners and for their own well-being. Our survey showed that approximately 70% of staff would prefer to attend the office when they needed to and no more than 3 days per week. By considering this alongside our occupational survey prior to the pandemic, we can reduce our overall floor space within Endeavour House and use these savings to deliver truly collaborative and inspiring workspaces for our organisations, whilst also delivering a net saving of approximately $300,000 per council and reducing our impact on the environment by reducing travel. This project will deliver creative, flexible workspaces for staff and councillors as we return to more face-to-face collaborations. It is more important that we invest in delivering these workspaces for our people as they continue to work hard for our residents, whether they are working in the office, working from home, or throughout our districts. And I'm excited to see this vision being delivered and to see how this supports and transforms our organisations as we continue to focus on serving our residents. Can I call for a seconder, please? Councillor Richardson?
Yes, Chair, very happy to second, and I've got a few points to make, but I'll save those for the debate.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from Cabinet members? Questions from anybody else? Councillor Wellham?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the table on paragraph 6.4, and it appears to me that there is a potential for a saving of £338,000, subject to a cost of £250,000. Now, that's not a huge saving, and I'm just concerned. I mean, it's a good idea. I'm not decrying the idea at all. I think it's a good idea, but there are one or two concerns. One is we don't know what the cost of the dilapidations might be, and whilst I think to have the right sort of furniture is a good idea, there could be a lot of furniture being thrown away for new furniture to be brought in at cost. So I think it would be useful to know what the real cost of this is, whether there is any saving or not. There may be, there may not be. That's not the important thing. The important thing is that the staff have working conditions where they can give of their best. So that brings me on to my second question, and that is around the implications of staff working at home. What are the financial and environmental cost of staff working at home? And also, how are we going to check on the health and well-being of staff who might not be seen very often? Quite often people can get sort of down in the dumps, and if they're picked up if they're in the office, but they could well their well-being could deteriorate if they don't see their colleagues very often.
Thank you, Councillor Wellham. I'm going to bring in Emily on this one. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for those questions. Just working through those in order, the dilapidations costs will be borne by the council whenever they give up the property. So, in essence, there's no saving or additional cost. It's more about bringing that cost forward. So, rather than it being in 5 years' time when the lease expires, it would be this autumn when the break is implemented. We will work with the County Council to minimise those dilapidations, and I'm confident that we can deliver those within the budget. With regard to your comments around furniture, I completely agree. We need to make the best use of the furnitures we have available, and the brief that we gave our consultants was to make sure we recycle as much furniture as possible. So we are reusing, for example, the desks that are within our floor plate. We're also looking to reuse storage as well. So there will be a mixture of new furniture and retaining some of the existing furniture that still serves a purpose. In terms of your comments with regard to staff and how we can make sure that their well-being is being protected, I think that's the point of this exercise largely, is about making sure we have the right spaces for our people to work in, and that we're supporting their wider well-being. So for some people, working remotely works better for them. For others, it doesn't. We're empowering our staff and their managers to use the facilities that we have available to suit the needs of their services and their staff. You're quite right that when people are working remotely in the way that we have done over the last few years, we do need to be a bit more proactive about making sure that people and their well-being are being protected. And that's part of the approach we're taking to make sure that managers are appropriately trained in order to be able to manage staff in this hybrid way. And probably focuses in on the amount of time we've committed to the well-being of our staff throughout the last 2 years. We have committed much more time to ensuring the well-being of our staff than we would have done when we were working in a more traditional way. So I hope that helps to address some of your concerns.
Yeah, there's just the question about the environmental impact of staff working at home, because they've either, in the winter, they've got heating on in every house that they're working in, whereas if they were all here, then we'd be heating one building.
Apologies, sorry, I missed that one. So in terms of the environmental benefits, it's a very challenging question to answer. If people are coming into Endeavour House or one single location, then yes, you are heating one space. However, those people have also got to travel to that one space, and they may be doing so from quite some distance. So I think there's a balance really between what those environmental impacts are in terms of reducing travel, which we've certainly seen over the pandemic, as well as the kind of offset of potentially houses needing to be heated a little bit more. There are some other environmental benefits that we've seen throughout the pandemic as well. So we've seen far less printing occurring with people working remotely, being more reliant on their digital connections rather than a paper connection. So I think that's an area we will need to look at further and review as we move forward. But certainly we can see some environmental benefits from working in this agile way, so that we're not bringing people into the office unnecessarily. If they can do things in a remote way, and that's the best way of serving the businesses and service areas that they work for, then they have the flexibility to do that, whilst also understanding that some people don't have the same setup at home in order to work effectively, so they have the ability to come into Endeavour House to work. So if they're concerned about their heating, they can obviously come in and work from an Endeavour House instead.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to open up this item for debate. Does anybody wish to come in? Councillor Richardson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Put simply, I think this is brilliant. I think it's absolutely right that we consider now what our corporate footprint looks like. I think many organisations across the country are doing the same post-COVID. It seems entirely sensible for us to be doing so. But actually, I think what this does is gives us a real opportunity to kind of reassess the way that we work and the way that we deliver for our residents. And I think fundamentally this is about getting the right balance between supporting our staff in terms of flexible working and their own work-life balance. And I think there are loads of benefits for us as an organisation associated with that. Things like productivity, job satisfaction, recruitment and retention. If we can offer people the ability to work in the way that they want to work and the way that they feel best able to contribute, I think we'll have a much stronger workforce as a result. But also simultaneously enhancing the benefits of working in collaboration with our partners, as you've quite rightly said, Chair. And I think looking at my portfolio, I think I've got probably the best example of that in terms of well-being, because we are located in the building that has the CCG, which includes the Chief Exec designate of the new Integrated Care Board. We've got the Public Health Team at Suffolk County Council, and we've got the University of Suffolk and the Integrated Care Academy not too far down the road, which I think is absolutely fantastic. In the NHS, for example, we talk a lot about the co-location of services, and I think it's absolutely right that we apply that same thinking to the co-location of local government. And as far as I'm concerned, for co-locating with our health and social care partners, this could not be a better place for us to be based. And I think it's really important, obviously, to consider not only what we're currently doing, but also how we can improve that in the future. And I think that's why it's so important that contained within this is this new redesign of the space that we do occupy for it to include more collaboration space. And so I'm really pleased to see that in the footplate design, because I think that will only enhance the way that we can work more collaboratively with the people that we share this building with. In terms of, I appreciate there are some cost savings in this, and it's right that we shouldn't be paying for space that we're not using, but actually I think fundamentally it's that value-adding aspect for the organisational benefits we can accrue as a result is what I think is the real kind of driving force behind what we should be doing in this strategy, and then transforming the way that we work as a result, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So I am enthusiastically endorsing this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come in? Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. This break clause, which I believe is this autumn, to me it just feels perfectly timed. I'd like to commend whoever first negotiated that at the start of the lease. We've talked about our finances earlier, the surpluses and the reserves and things, and I think it'd be so easy to be a lazy council and just keep things going on as they were, because there aren't those financial pressures. So I really do commend the officers for driving this forward, for looking at these operational disciplines and the financial benefits that come from it. And it's great that we are a dynamic council that way and think that way. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. It became clear, even before COVID hit us, that our existing first floor was being underutilised. Even pre-pandemic, the highest occupancy on that floor was only 60%. And even with the reduction to half a plate, we can still accommodate 60% of our staff. So any fears or worries that we might have about people wanting to work and not being able to find a space is ill-founded, not only because we have got the space on just half a floor plate, but because of the wider collaboration areas scattered throughout the building. You know, the ground floor, the coffee shops, the coffee platforms, all the whole of the top floor is all collaboration space, and it's collaboration that we are in most need of. So I totally endorse this. This is a fantastic opportunity, and it's going to save us time and effort, and also contribute to our officers' well-being as well. So on that note, I'm going to ask the governance officer to conduct the vote. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 8 votes for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 12, MCA/21/38 is the Haven Gateway Partnership membership. And I'm going to invite Councillor Brewster, the Cabinet Member for Economic Growth, to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to introduce this report in which Cabinet are asked to consider whether or not the Council should retain its membership of the Haven Gateway Partnership beyond the 31st of March 2022. The economic landscape has changed significantly since the Haven Gateway since the Haven Gateway Partnership was established over 20 years ago. New economic partnerships have been set up, such as the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership, Suffolk Growth, and more recently Freeport East, which have allowed our businesses to access a range of support, funding, and new opportunities to grow and innovate. The recent announcements around levelling up could also see economic partners in the East work more closely together. Whilst I am pleased our Council has been part of the notable successes of the Haven Gateway Partnership, at a time when resources needed even more scrutiny, it has been appropriate to review the future provision of the partnership alongside some of the other important cross-border priorities and collaborations. These existing and new partnerships, such as the Suffolk Climate Change Partnership, appear to have stronger links to businesses in our districts, provide more new opportunities for routes into funding, and are built upon strong governance and a united vision for the future for Suffolk East and the East. Whilst the Haven Gateway provides a unique link to North Essex, I am confident that the strong collaboration already developed with Essex as part of the Freeport East will continue to grow and prosper. I would therefore propose that Cabinet approve the 3 recommendations in this report: to note the growth and existence of new partnerships across Suffolk and the wider East, to withdraw from the Haven Gateway Partnership at the end of March 31st this year, that delegated authority be given to the Assistant Director, Economic Development and Regeneration, and in consultation with the portfolio holder for economic growth, to finalise any legal documents associated with a withdrawal from the partnership. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brewster. And can I have a seconder? Councillor Fleming?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to second this recommendation.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from Cabinet members? Questions from anybody else? No? Anybody wish to engage in debate? Councillor Fleming.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to endorse what Councillor Bruce has just said, with which I most wholeheartedly agree. The funding priorities and investment strategy of this area have definitely changed since 2001, and with new priorities emerging, and particularly in the areas of environment, energy and public health. We're forming new alliances with neighbours, including local authorities, counties, and particularly I'm pleased to see, with the Freeport East and the growth of energy projects and the importance of energy to this region are links with North East Essex. So I think there's everything about this report makes sense, and I'm happy to second it.
So the recommendations are 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3. And I'm now going to ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, your vote is now in progress. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 8 votes for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your time this morning. Meeting's finished at 11:44. The next meeting will be on Monday the 7th of March at 10:30. Thank you, members. Thank you, everybody.